Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation where two normal Christians are making sense of a world in chaos. My name is Luke, that's Mike across from me, and today we're going to discuss the primary, this year's upcoming Civil War, not a football game, we'll see how it goes, and then a little bit about culture and division. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Okay, I have a question for you.
All right.
So, Nikki Haley
Yep.
comes in second to Trump in the New Hampshire primary.
Yep.
CNN's exit poll says that 70% of the voters who voted for Nikki Haley
Yeah.
are not Republicans.
That's right. They're Democrats.
So there's two ways to look at this, right?
Yeah.
The Democrats are trying to sway or manipulate the Republican side.
Okay.
They don't have someone to vote for because Biden didn't go on their ballot because the Democrats...
Well, they can still vote for Biden.
They did, and
Yeah.
70-something thousand
Yeah.
apparently did.
Yeah.
But because the Democrats were saying we're not going to participate in the New Hampshire primary, they can go wherever they want in New Hampshire.
The Democrat Party, the national.
They can vote for either party without having to
DNC.
change registration. But the
Yeah.
question I have is it that they're so fed up with Biden, they'd rather vote for Haley than Biden? In other words, the Democrats are looking for a viable candidate
Yeah.
versus this manipulation, because that many thousands of people switching around, and you'd have to have a pretty
Did you see
concerted effort.
they interviewed the one young lady? Are you really going to vote for Nikki Haley? She votes for Nikki Haley in the primary there. She goes, no, I'm going to vote for Biden, but I just don't want Trump. This is a way to try to take away.
There's enough people
that
doing
was
that.
somebody platform. But I think your other point is completely legitimate. I think there is Democrat frustration with Biden. It's hard to back a guy who's stumbling, falling down, and really can't do a coherent sentence without speculatively being juiced up on drugs in order to be able to
Oh my
talk.
gosh, I saw the best comeback. It was a quote of Biden mumbling out his words as he
Yeah.
does, and then somebody did a comment on it, which was the scripture saying no more than two people should speak in tongues at a time, and there should be an interpreter. Otherwise, you should remain silent in the church.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Did you see the other one that the Trump camp put out about senior living at the White
I
House?
did see that one, yeah.
And that was hilarious. It's devastating. Even if you don't like Trump or think it was clever, it's devastating to see, they pick 5 clips of Biden stumbling, shuffling on the beach, talking incoherently, and there's 55 clips of him doing that.
Yeah, I don't know
How
if I
do you
was
back
on this.
that easily?
Like I can't think of a time I listened to a whole speech of his
It doesn't happen
because
anymore.
he just mumbles along.
Yeah.
And one of the things he's doing, I've started watching the clips I do see, and when he starts getting all fast and then whispering and doing the thing, he's just reading somebody else's words. He doesn't even know what's coming next.
Yeah.
So he's trying to make
I
it
know.
lively.
I know.
But he
I
doesn't
know.
actually know how to build the momentum because he's not
I know.
following it.
Yeah, he's crossed the line over into decline.
Yeah.
And on that same note, I would say that I've seen a burst in Trump more recently, a little bit of his. He's back on the trail giving speeches in packed places. But the fire and energy is back to like it was. Its campaign mode is really
He's getting
kicked
his
in.
mojo back, is what you're saying.
And I think maybe I misassessed it earlier. Instead of a loss of mojo, he's not present, and the campaign has a long way to go. You don't sprint and marathon. Right. And but now it's starting to kick, now the movement's starting. So, and I thought maybe there was a loss of vigor, but now I'm thinking that could have been a wrong assessment. It could have been more that you have to pace yourself in the years between when you why get so riled up when you're really not campaigning yet?
Okay, so Trump put out a thing against Haley this week, and he was criticizing that she had been derogatory toward him. That was one of his main criticisms in his little tweet. And it seems laughable to me that's his shtick. But for some reason, it seems to work. And I don't know if it's just that's the level of loyalty people feel toward him.
Okay, that's what it is, I think.
How dare
It's
you
the
speak
loyalty.
against our guy?
It's loyalty.
And that's how he thinks of himself. How
Yeah.
dare you speak against me? That's my job.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a little inconsistent. Even I did not like when DeSantis first decided to run. First of all, I wasn't sure if it was a wise decision at the time, but I could understand it. But then Trump attacked him and the DeSanctimonious thing came out. It wasn't a bad insult, but it was poorly done, I think, because I think he should have And I remember thinking at the time that DeSantis was doing the right thing by not responding.
Yeah.
But then they had to start, and
well, everybody saw Rubio.
Bout.
Remember, Rubio tried to fight back at the 2016
that's right.
primary, and he didn't.
Well, he fought back in a passive manner. Ted Cruz fought back too, but then Ted Cruz backed off when he bowed out. And I remember watching Trump respect Cruz, not respect Rubio.
Right.
Because of the way they fought back.
Right.
I think Trump has no problem with a in-your-face front taking swings at each other. I'll respect you after. It's like the Quiet Man and John Wayne and the guy, they have a fist fight and his future brother-in-law.
Yeah.
And then they have a drink afterward, right? There's respect in that.
Yeah.
The Haley thing is a weird thing. I know I'm pushing this opening. The Haley, do you think she should step out, be done?
I don't have opinions about it. I don't think she will. I think she's banking that she'll be the only one with any delegates when Trump goes to prison.
You don't have, okay, so that is when do you think he's going to go to prison?
I think something's going to happen. I don't think it'll go smooth. I don't think it'll all blow over like everybody seems to think it will.
Yeah.
But I also think Trump is banking on being in the news 24/7 when the trial gets started, which is right around Super Tuesday. Mm-hmm. So the messaging I see in both sides is we want Trump to be our opponent from the left. And then there's this.
I've never bought into that, honestly. It sounds 3D chess.
Well, it sounds like Trump is the one because here's my rationale on it, is that the left, their fuel is the moral outrage. And if you get DeSantis, you can't moral outrage on DeSantis. Mm-hmm. You know, you can make these accusations, but he's got clarity. He's straightforward. Even Nikki Haley is better at that, right? And so they need Trump to fuel their base.
I think that's true, but I think they're playing both sides of an argument. One side of the argument is we want him as our candidate. We think we can beat him. But I think they're saying that with the almost seemingly inevitableness that he's going to be their candidate.
Yeah.
I think they don't want him as their candidate, and I think this is the strong emotion, which is why they're indicting him and trying to take him off the board as anything they can, almost with a desperation, trying to get rid of him. I think that's the true feeling. They're terrified of him as a candidate.
Well, they're terrified of him as president.
That's right.
So I think if you collect all of the things they're doing, it's to keep him from being president. Yeah.
Yeah, and then if you and I think there was chicanery taking place in the last one, so that it was a stolen election. Stop the steal. If that's true, then they know it, right? They did it and they know it.
Sure.
And if it's true and they know it, that means they know they lost last time, and they had to cheat. They had to have this unique set of circumstances to pull off some semblance of a win. Mm-hmm. What do they do next time? They already know they've lost to him twice. First time, completely surprised.
Right.
If they'd have known they'd have cheated to take care of it then. Second time, they pulled all the stops, and the only way to do it was so blatant and so obvious, and they had to have COVID to cover.
Yep.
Third time then, I think they're terrified.
Pause after that second time.
Yeah.
Because they were then able to gain so much power.
I agree.
Centralizing wealth into the hands of the elite, right? Through COVID.
Yep.
More draconian mandates, more social upheaval.
Yep.
And so they're saying, this is working for us.
At least as long as they're in power, it's working for them. Because the American people increasingly dislike it. Not just the right, the left dislikes it, the moderates, the independents.
But here's the trade-off. Even if Trump got reelected, if they gained that much power last time he got elected, why would they be that afraid of him doing it again? I agree.
Well, why are they trying to die? They are afraid of him.
I don't know that they are. I think that that's their story, and I think the day-to-day Democrat voter is afraid of him because they're being told to be.
Well, the reason I think they have, but I don't think it holds water, and that is they think Trump. You saw all the stories about vengeance. Trump's going to get vengeance,
right?
Because it's what they would do. Now, is Trump going to do some things? I think he will. Will it be vengeance? I think he's going to frustrate the right by not doing as much as many want him to do.
Because he secretly wants them to like him.
He wants them to like, you mean the Democrats?
He wants Chuck Schumer to think he's a good guy.
Maybe at the beginning he did. I doubt. I don't think that anymore. I think
that's why he bowed to Fauci the whole way down.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say that even. I think the Fauci thing is his germophobia. Right. Trump has a germophobic component to him. But my point is that he'll do something, but I am on your side when you say, and because I agree with this, what he can really do, dismantling the deep state. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, that's not fiat for 30 days and it's taken care of. If you even want to splinter it and put the department of this and the department of that in Ohio and the department of this in Utah and you want desegregate in a sense, I think that would be a great idea. Mm-hmm. Pulling it off.
Decentralized.
Yeah. I heard that in my head and thought, that's a word now reserved for only one topic.
So one thing that does give me a little glimmer of hope, and it's not big, is the idea of Vivek was to be the VP.
Do you think that's a possibility?
Because he's so adamant about dismantling the federal
bureaucracy.
I agree
with you. Do you have an on second thought reflection going on about VP stuff?
VPs don't actually matter is the problem.
In a sense, they don't.
But with Trump, they do more than most because he's so hands off. And he'd rather sit around watching cable news and see how he's faring.
They do matter because they're always strategy involved. So they clearly matter.
They matter to the electorate.
Yes, that's right.
But to actual execution of his mandates.
But then you have, so I just read an article about Reagan and George W. Bush.
Yeah.
People speculating about what Trump will do, et cetera, and how Reagan, and this is about Nikki Haley not quitting. So apparently this is in 1980 and George Bush was way outgunned by Reagan in the 80 primaries.
Okay.
But he stays into the end. And the article claimed, and whether it's true or not, I was really too young to have an assessment at the time, but the article claimed that Reagan's respect for Bush grew over time because of his dogged determination. So he brings him in then, and he is, at that point he does nothing again, right? Except maybe bring Texas, but Reagan already had Texas. But then he is a shoo-in in 89.
Right.
And that's your VP walk in. And so the one thing that does have impact is who your VP is. You think that's, in a sense, almost the automatic nomination for your party.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we got Biden.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Did you see I think it's Clay Travis. There's two radio guys who replaced Rush Limbaugh in his time slot. And Travis was coming out saying Trump should pick Nikki Haley because the suburban white women vote would be
There's truth in what he's saying. I think it would be a devastating pick.
I think his base would struggle a lot.
I think it would be more than struggle. We hate it with a passion.
But the thing with Trump is, I think that's his focus on loyalty is so strong.
I agree with you.
That he might do something like that just to test and prove how loyal he can make everyone be. He can make them all go back.
I would agree with your assumption.
It's the I could murder on Fifth Avenue mentality. Do you know what I'm saying?
I hear you on that. Yeah. I don't think so.
I don't think it would be wise, but he's also in a bind because the suburbs are what decide the elections. Because the inner cities are Democrat, the countries are Republican. It's the suburbs that make the difference. So he's got to find a strategy one way or another.
Vivek is most like him.
Yep.
Mesmerize a crowd.
Yeah.
Bold.
He's got
Trump
the young
likes
people.
Those things.
Yeah.
The young people and articulation. He's going to be supportive. And he has showed massive loyalty as an opposing candidate.
Right.
Deep respect. I'm going to disagree.
But again, does Trump, because a bully, a tyrant, somebody whose focus is on their own power, right? Which Trump has a strain of that.
He has a strain, I would agree.
Yeah.
As long as
and I don't think any president is without that.
Yes,
to be
I
honest,
agree with you.
Right? I'm not trying to make
a larger than normal ego.
Yes. So, like you were saying, tyrants respect other people with power, right?
That's right.
You get in that fight and then you show your strength and then get some respect.
Yeah.
The trick with Vivek is he didn't fight Trump. Therefore, Trump is going to look down his nose and say, this guy's a weakling. He couldn't even take me on.
Maybe.
And that will be harder, I think, for Trump.
Maybe.
Yeah. All right, before we get into the gospel according to Texas Republicans, if you are enjoying this conversation and you're interested in how we mix our Christian understanding of the world with things that are actually going on, click subscribe and share this with a friend. Leave a comment. We want to know what you think, and we love actually interacting with our listeners. So, all right, we got updates in Texas. Some of you guys aren't paying attention. I wanted to fill you in.
Updates like as we started here?
No, not of today, but I mean, in the last couple days, the governor of Texas, if you haven't been listening, or following along in the news, which is understandable. You got a life. The governor of Texas was putting up razor wire and trying to shut down the flow of illegal immigrants coming over the Mexico border. And his claim is that the Constitution requires that the federal government secure the borders from invasion, and they're calling that an invasion. And I think that you could get a little debate around that maybe. But
sure.
Whose job is it then if the federal government refuses and seems to have an investment in letting more people over the border?
And breaking federal law.
With the hopes of pleasing the business leaders who get cheap labor and maybe voters for decades to come.
It's win-win for
when
them.
you make them citizens. Okay.
And destroying a southern stronghold of conservatism.
So Texas has been fighting back with a couple of specific strategies. One is just offering free rides to Chicago and New York to anybody coming across the border, and then creating a crisis in those two cities. Actually, the crisis that Texas has been dealing with forever.
Oh, yeah. So it's like 10% that Chicago, New York gets, that Texas is getting, and Chicago and New York freak out.
Sure. And then the other thing is they're actually trying to close the border. They can't build a wall. It's an open border. So we're going to put up razor wire. We're going to try to block it. Biden administration sues. It goes to the Supreme Court. Last week, Supreme Court says, we'll decide later. But in the meantime, the federal government can take down the razor wire. Mm-hmm. So then in the last few days, Governor Abbott says, we're going to keep putting it up. We're going to defy the Supreme Court.
Baby.
Yeah. And then so far, 25 governors have signed on saying they support Governor Abbott. So exactly half of the 50 states. Not only that, 14 states have sent personnel and support. By way, I would assume, by personnel, it would be National Guard, because the Texas governor has also mobilized the National Guard, calling it an emergency. So civil war is on the menu, it would seem. And here's my question, first of all. I've been waiting for what's the COVID this time, right?
Yeah.
It was this time 4 years ago when COVID started getting talked about, breaking out around, and everybody said, okay, what are we going to do? It's an emergency.
Yep.
And this was the timeline to build up to get Trump out of office.
Yeah.
So is this going to be an every 4-year cycle for one? But it seems like a cycle that we can't come back from. Civil war is quite
there's been for many years now a thing called October surprise, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Now we need the February setup.
Seriously, it's the winter.
the
dark
February
winter.
Something that, creates the February crisis or whatever.
Right. Yeah, it's the Act 1.
Yeah. Well, the Supreme Court is an interesting thing Texas defined, because I think there's two issues that are connected and yet separate. The one is the issue itself about the immigration, the invasion, and you have the word gospel there, that whole idea. And then the second issue is the role of executive branches and judicial branches and the clash, because in one sense you could say this is an interesting position to be in, given that the consistent Republican or conservative message has been the Supreme Court don't make laws. We need to get a Supreme Court majority that are conservative, people who read the Constitution literally, because then they can settle the stuff that the executive branch of the Democrats and the legislative branch of the Democrats, when they do their things and are out of bound, we expect the Supreme Court, if we can get the right people in there that interpret the laws faithfully, to say, no, that's not right. And then we want them to abide by what the Supreme Court says.
Right.
And now Texas saying, well, we're not going to abide by it. And so if you're a person on the left and you say, you just want it when you like it and you're willing to break it.
That's right. Well, the question is, what is the rule of law?
That's what the question is. That
is it the
becomes big
Constitution
question.
or is it the Supreme Court?
Let's not just say Supreme Court, the three divisions, legislative, executive, and Supreme Court.
Well, in the last, 50 to 100 years, the Supreme Court has taken on this sort of aura of infallibility, where once they decree it, it's like Holy Writ. And then people have never defied it, at least in recent history. But because it's meant to have a checks and balance.
It's been a movement to the left when the court does that. And so the right has never defied those things. And the left has taken advantage of them. Now there's starting to be ones, well, this is the first one where the right is saying, no, we're going to defy this.
Right.
And
I think the last time the Supreme Court mandated something that a state refused was Birmingham, Alabama when the Democrat governor said, "I won't allow you to resegregate the schools."
Right.
And then the National Guard was brought out by Kennedy, I believe. And it was kind of a crisis moment then too. But I was talking to a friend. Right. I was talking to a friend in military background, and I said, you've got this National Guard who are trained by the federal military and are sort of loyal to the federal, and yet are commanded by governors.
And they're
so
volunteers.
What are they going to do? Because what might happen is Obama could call the U.S. military to bring all those National Guardsmen into service on their side, and now they have to decide, which is how civil wars get started, or at least violent coups.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, let's get back to the first one, the nature, because I think there's an argument to be made that what we have in place as a government, with its good things and its drawbacks, there's good things with a king and there's drawbacks with a king.
Sure.
There's good things with a republic and there's drawbacks with a republic, and we have a republic. But undergirding them all is law that is moral, connected to God.
Right.
These are just things put in place by human invention, and they may have some sourcing in God's expression of his will for the governing of human life. But underneath it is the moral order that is of a stronger nature than the human government set up above it.
Yeah.
So in that sense, to defy the human government there's a place in which human government as an authority reflection of God is not to be honored, because it's now dishonoring God.
And that's why the accusation of inconsistency
doesn't
stick.
It doesn't stick.
Because what Abbott and others are saying is, no, we have a higher law.
But this is a tricky argument. It only doesn't stick when you assume Christian foundations or theistic foundations. Because if you reject that, well, then why shouldn't it stick?
Well, yeah, I mean, people aren't going to believe that it should stick, but it still will. Like, God will judge the living and the dead.
There's two issues. Not only that it should reasonably, but it will even if you deny it.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with you on that. It's not just in the dying point. It's in the way the universe works.
Yeah, that's right. You can say gravity doesn't apply to me.
Yeah, exactly.
And when you jump off the building, there is a delay where it feels like you're weightless.
That's a great analogy. The chaos that is being sowed by the left because the right, this in one sense, and I'm probably going to agree with you and on this rebellion by Texas is a good thing. Not so much because I disagree with you on other things on this topic, but in this case, it is upholding what God has said is right.
Yeah.
And it becomes a life and death matter.
Okay, so we're going to take it to there. What is it you're saying, or what are you thinking of when God said it was right? What rightness because there are a lot of Christians, left-leaning, granted, who are arguing that no, hospitality, openness of borders. The Great Commission is being fulfilled by bringing in all these foreign military-age men.
That's my question on America.
What command are you thinking of?
Okay, so I think the wanton destruction of property and peoples. I believe it is an invasion.
Yeah.
Now, it's not a normal invasion in that there's not a centralized intention by some other country, right? It's actually an invasion coordinated by our own leftism leaders.
Okay.
But they're leveraging people in levels of poverty where they come from places of oppression. Mm-hmm. And I put those two together. We have always had a place for somebody to make an appeal because I'm going to be killed if you don't give me amnesty, or it's not amnesty, whatever it's called. That's not what this is. These are just places where it's oppressive to live, but your life is not at stake, and they're poor.
Right.
And I'm sorry, we can't take all the oppressed and poor in the world and bring them into America. It's an impossibility. So I don't think the gospel's argument can be we should invite them all into the world. I think we're gospel-oriented when we have a policy of immigration, and I also believe an element of quotas is legitimate. The reason that we are able to show mercy and generosity to places that are difficult is because we are prospering along certain lines of freedoms and liberties. And so we will take people into this at a rate that we can assimilate, because you got to buy in.
Yeah.
You got to buy into this. Otherwise, we destroy it. And then we're all going to be poor and under oppression.
Right.
And that's not the gospel. That's not biblical.
Well, not only that, it's clearly underhanded in the sense that there are no amount of people that we could bring into America that would resolve the world's poverty issues.
Exactly.
Right? There's 1 billion people in the world living off $2 a day or less.
That's right.
1 billion people is 1,000 million.
Yeah, so it's a false compassion.
So imagine you had a stadium, like a basketball arena full with 1,000 people in it, right? Maybe a college arena or a high school really full.
Yeah.
You could say, well, if our only compassionate choice is to take 2 people and bring them out of poverty, and now we're going to solve the world's problem because we took 2.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. That's what a billion versus 2 million is.
Exactly right.
Right. And even if you bring 50 people,
Yep.
there's still 1,000
Yep.
to be dealt with.
Now there's a whole adage of, well, if you can't save all the starfish and throw them back, then why do any? Well, it mattered to that one.
Yeah.
That's legitimate, I think. But I think now what we're getting into is my point on America First that I was going to make, the state versus the individual. The individual should do what they can.
Well, and part of the issue is, before we get to the individual, the other thing that jumps to my mind is you're also undermining the prosperity of the countries these people are leaving. So imagine in our small town, right?
That's true.
If everyone between the age of 18 and 25 or 18 and 40 left and didn't come back.
That's true.
That's essentially what's happening in Guatemala, right? Or in El Salvador or Mexico, regions of Mexico.
That's what the governor, the new
America.
president of El Salvador said in the Tucker Carlson interview.
Yeah.
1/3 of their population lives in the U.S. and they're not coming back. And they're the population where we need, our biggest resource is those
humans.
people.
Yeah, that's
They
right.
need to come back here to make our country prosper.
Right.
Yeah. Well, my question had been on America First. It dawned on me just 2 days ago, I was thinking, America First. Could that be, what if somebody said this? That's not the gospel. Jesus says to give your life away for others.
Okay.
America First as a movement is anti-gospel because the gospel says, no, serve others, give your life away. You die. Right? So why are you saying America First? And I thought, well, you know what? First of all, that's a reasonable question, I think. Mm-hmm. But I think it falls apart when you make the distinction between the state and the individual. I think it conflates them, as if the gospel requirements of the individual to die to yourself and to give your life away for others. I came not to be served, but to serve.
Right.
Now you bump that up to the state level and say, well, that's the state's job as well. No, it isn't. The state has the sword given to it. The sword is not the gospel. The sword is the judgment of God. Right. And the state's job is not to reflect gospel priorities. It is to reflect judgment priorities.
So that sounds sort of like the Pilgrims mentality that the Old Testament instructs us on how to deal with nations in God's view, and the New Testament on how to deal with individuals. Would you say that's roughly accurate?
I would prefer not to comment on that, only because you've said that a few times, and I'd never heard that before you said it. I don't know what I think about it. My instinct is to not like it, but I don't trust that instinct because it was given in a context in which you and I are disagreeing, and the ego says, you just said something that I haven't thought of before, so I want to oppose it just because it's in an argument, and that's not fair.
Right. Well, think of it this way, and I'm not trying to back you into a corner, but think of it in the sense that the Old Testament law, Jesus was very explicit. He's fulfilling the law, right? Through his death, we are set free from that obligation of the law.
Yes.
But the law is still good. It still restores the soul, right?
Yeah.
And so when we understand God's law and we take from it the wisdom that he's giving us and apply it into our modern context, we bring a restorative quality.
I agree with that.
Right? We should be guided by the Old Testament.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It is building a justness in the human life and experience in society.
Yeah.
The only part I would back off for me personally without thinking more about it. I have been thinking about it these last several months since you said it. The whole nations and individuals, Old Testament, New Testament. I'm not sure if I am by that or not. But I do believe that there's a law focus in the Old Testament that pointed at a gospel in shadows that came to clarity in the New and yet does not lose the law component.
Yeah.
That's
well,
what I
and
totally
it
agree
is
with.
interesting to think because we have all these parallels between institutions like family versus government, but they're not the same, and they
They're
can't
not
be
the
the
same.
same.
Yeah, that's right.
Not in the sense that that we know they don't overlap, but their dynamics,
The dynamics are different.
they don't completely overlap. There's
No.
there's echoes, I think.
That's right. Echoes is fair.
Yeah. The other side of that too, though, is like I hear a lot of Christians really harp on the separation of church and state, that like it shouldn't be a thing. And the reason I think is that they want Christianity to have more influence in the government, which I do as well, probably more than most, right? But I think the Old Testament does show a separation of church and state in the institutions, and specifically that Moses and Aaron have different leadership roles. And that's from the very beginning of setting up a nation in God's leadership, right? That Moses is going to basically represent the government. He's judging, he's establishing the laws, and he's doing it all under the purview of God's guidance, right? He's spending time in the presence of God. And he's called a prophet. And then on the other side, you have Aaron, who is leading the worship of God in the tabernacle, and his descendants become the priests, and that priesthood and its ceremonies are a reflection of heaven, right? And how we come into the presence of God. So both of them are reflected, but they're meant to be separated. They defend each other. They hold each other accountable, prophets and priests, but they're not led by one person. They're both led by God. And I think that does bear a resemblance to how we think of, and we've talked about a lot,
interesting.
church being separate from government.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean Christians shouldn't be in government, right? It doesn't
same
mean
people
mayors shouldn't go to church, right?
The same people that are guided by Aaron are also guided by Moses.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, would you throw the trifecta there, a prophet, priest, king, in that the original intention by God was he was king?
He would be the king. Yeah.
And the whole kingship that developed under Israel, we know he actually said, it's not what I wanted. I gave it to you because you were begging for it.
Right.
But it's not the way I wanted to set it up. So would you say that in that sense, he intended to keep kingship and give Mosaic law, even the element of nation and law, the societal component, and Aaron being worship, it's still all the same people, but now it's individualized more? But
I'm not sure I understand the question. Does God endorse kings on the earth? I think you're right. That's not his plan. His plan was to be the king over the nation. And we know that because that's his plan now. Yeah. And that's his plan now in the sense that he's living in our hearts. Like that's what he was trying to show even the Israelites long before the gospel had fully been realized.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the wisdom of the founders and most governments to this day in minimizing, or at least in significantly limiting, the power of the executive branch, keeping them from becoming a king. Because you're allowing that position to remain with God.
Yeah.
But as we depart from God, we get despots, we get kings. Yeah. And so we see. All right, so what should a Christian do in dealing with immigration? I was just reading a news article about this huge nonprofit. They get like $250 million a year from the federal government. They're a Christian relief aid organization for immigrants coming across. And they get contracts from the federal government. And they're saying, and they're putting out, to Texas, you need to let these people through. This is the Christian thing to do. It's ministering to the poor. And the criticism I saw coming from Megan Basham, who writes for the Daily Wire and some other, and she comments on Christianity in particular, is, one, these people, in order to get their federal money, and this is to talk about what do you do when you get that government cheese, right? They've been mandated as a Christian organization. They're not allowed to share the gospel with anyone they minister to. So they're literally obeying man instead of God by a strict standard. The other one is they have this giant incentive to keep the money flowing only if you keep the people flowing. And so what should a Christian do when dealing with hospitality? You're driving down the road. I see this in Oregon a lot, where there are a lot of Latino families and immigrants, and this whole conflict creates this weird, but are they legal or illegal? Do they even want to be part of our community? They're very, the language difference makes it an issue. And all my kids are studying Spanish in school. I'm assuming that not only do you learn by learning Spanish, right, you're going to learn the Romantic languages on a better standard, but also that's only going to increase. Yeah. Do you have a thought of this is the gospel solution?
I do have a thought. I've talked over this with some other people many times. I think this company, whoever, and I don't need to know their name. I think they're completely wrong. Let them through. It is completely wrong, and it's not a Christian thing. I think that is. I don't think it would be wrong for Christians to form a company and say, we want to be merciful to people, and the government's going to give us money. Great. You say that we can't share the gospel. That's their decision. Say, okay, we'll sign up for that. We're going to do these acts of kindness. But at that place, I'd call it a theistic company, not a Christian company.
Well, if you had a Christian construction company that you worked for government contracts, you're not assuming you're going to spread the gospel.
Exactly right.
So something along those. You're providing services.
Yeah, you might be Christians, but your interaction with the world is along theistic grounds rather than Christian grounds.
Stop calling yourself a Christian organization.
That's right.
At that
That's
point.
exactly right. Now, it's a bunch of Christians. That's fine. And they're trying to do good. I have no problem with that at all. But they're not explicitly doing their thing as Christian. They're doing it as Christians, but it's not Christianity that they're promoting to these people. It is other levels of care, which is fine with me.
Wait, right. So what you're saying is because it's no longer explicitly Christian, obviously they're not sharing the gospel. You could argue it's compassion. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
They should no longer speak on behalf of God's standard.
Yeah, they're not the Christian element. Theistically, I think they can speak.
Right.
But they've not brought in the cross and Jesus and his kingship. They've just brought in the creator that made the world, and he wants people to be treated well.
And the other side of it is sort of like when you feed or when you give money to someone on the side of the street. That's not the same as feeding the poor.
No, it's not.
Do you know what I'm saying?
That's correct.
There's a dynamic that you're supporting that you don't realize how dysfunctional it is.
Yes.
I think the border, that's times 1,000.
Yes,
in the
I
sense
think that's
that the
right.
human trafficking, the child rape, the things that are going on where you're basically supporting the cartels controlling the U.S. border.
That's right.
By perpetuating this flow
exactly right.
of immigrants.
Yeah. So that's my first thought. The second thought is the primary role of compassion is with the individual as Christians. Now, this is my thinking, and I anticipate you might differ from it. But when I think of Christianity, then I think the primary role of compassion as Christians is as an individual, not as a state or organization. I think the gospel response, I think people who feel moved to go down to the border, I know some people who have done this. How can I go help? I don't agree that what's happening is right.
Yeah.
I think it's wrong, actually, but it's happening. I'm called in many places to go into a situation as a Christian. The situation itself is wrong. Sometimes a person could feel called to address the wrong. Yeah. Others to address the person that's in the wrong situation.
Right.
And to do that as a Christian, I think that's the primary calling for Christians in general, is to go as Christians to not address the wrongness. If you have a calling to address that, great.
Okay.
But the common every Christian has is to the whole thing with the poor, to show the orphans, widows, and the poor.
Right.
To care for them regardless of how they got there, regardless of the dysfunctional process that they got there. And I think that applies to us even in a republic where we have a role to play in that process in terms of electing and choosing. But to me, I think that if it was a king making that process or is a democratic republic, if the process gets corrupted, common to all Christians is to go help people being hurt.
Right.
No matter how they got there. Now it's a second question, and this is where I think I'm going to guess where your thoughts might go is, well, shouldn't they go and fix a problem? And now we're in the political realm of functioning as a Democrat. Yes, I think they should be good citizens, but now that's to me theistic responses rather than Christian.
I still don't understand what it means to have a theistic response, but that's neither
Grounded
here nor
in
there.
God as a creator versus the gospel message itself and the cross.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I don't know how in my head, I can't think like a theist.
Yeah.
So I don't know how I would do it that way.
Yeah.
But I could see how you would say even a theist who isn't Christian could get on board.
Yeah.
If that's what you mean.
Yeah.
But I don't disagree. It's interesting to me because I hear people talking about, and it crosses my mind, at what point would you go help those National Guardsmen who are standing against the federal government, right? Is there a Christian obligation, or at least is it a moral option for Christians to go fight in that way against the enemies they consider of their country? Mm-hmm. And it'd be interesting to think there are two Christians down at the border right now, one standing with those guardsmen putting up razor wire, and the other giving water to a child who's come across and maybe is
And
dying.
so that's a good illustration. I think that's a great point. And so I want to call one Christian the other theist, because the Christian giving water, the gospel message is to give your life away and to be killed and rise again, to die.
Like a soldier.
Well, it is like a soldier, but it is not to defeat somebody in the same way of taking their life. It's the defeat is cross-oriented. So Jesus is a soldier. The way he wins is by getting killed.
Right.
So he's not a soldier by beating his enemy on the outside of things. He beats him with the deeper magic, Lewis said. He beats him in a way the other soldier didn't even know. Pilate didn't even know the battle he was in.
Okay.
Herod didn't know the battle he was in. Jesus, if you want to say Jesus soldier, I'm fine with that. But he beats Pilate and Herod at a level of fighting that they didn't even know.
Right.
They wanted to fight at a level on which they interpret soldiering, and Jesus says, I'm not fighting there. So that's not the soldiering I'm called
So you're saying one person is living out the gospel, the other is within their rights as a Christian.
Yes, exactly.
But is not living out the gospel.
They're living out theism. They're living out the state is given the sword by God. It is just and right. But it's not the gospel principles in play. It's justice principles in play.
Okay.
It's Old Testament. And it's not as if justice doesn't point to the gospel. And it's not as if the gospel doesn't have justice and law in it.
Right.
But in terms of a primary emphasis.
So then, and this gets down to the pacifism concept.
It does a little bit.
Because the question then is, what is the right or obligation of a Christian who's trying to live out the gospel?
Yeah.
Because we just laid out, here's all the ways that the open border causes more people to suffer.
That's right.
And evil people to prevail.
That's right. That's right.
So in what way does a Christian live out the gospel by defending against evil? Like, is a policeman living out the gospel by killing someone that's trying to murder? Do you see what I'm saying?
I think they're living out a calling from God.
Right.
And they can do that in a gospel manner, but they have joined the state.
Right.
They have not, their allegiance is to this, they're given authority to have the sword because God gives the state authority. God's interaction with the state and the sword is not a gospel interaction. It's a law interaction.
So in my thinking, I separate that as that's the obligation of the church. The church wouldn't organize their own police force, right? But Christians would become policemen who
I agree with
feel
that.
called in that way.
Individual Christians can.
Yeah.
And then they should do it as much gospel-centered way that they can, but there's going to be a restriction. They're going to have a billy club and they're going to have to hit somebody.
Yeah.
Jesus in the garden says, put this sword away. And he heals this isn't the way I wanted you to do it.
Because in that moment, if you're trying to establish or uphold God's kingdom with physical violence, you can't do it. It won't work.
Even though what Peter does when he brings that sword out, what they're doing is wrong and unjust.
Yeah.
They're violating the sword and authority that's been given by God. And so he's not wrong in what he does, but he's living in the realm that Jesus says, that's not my primary realm.
You also have God as the sovereign saying, no, I'm sending Jesus to die.
I know.
So even if it's the right thing in that moment, right? It's just that Peter should stop these evil people.
It is.
It was in that moment the will of God instead to allow Jesus to suffer injustice.
But I don't think that's why Jesus stopped Peter, because this moment he recognized an exception. I think he stopped Peter on principled grounds that hold in other circumstances, as in terms of if we're going primary, the bell curve thing. We're talking 80-20. There's always exceptions. But which is my issue with pacifism. I think pacifism is a good argument, as we have this conversation, is a good illustrator, because the pacifist wants to say, I don't want an 80-20 split. I don't want to have to figure where it might be a war that I can take somebody's life. I just want, as a Christian, to be saying, I'm never to take a life, 100%. I don't ever touch the sword.
So I lost the 80-20 thing. Because what I'm trying to construct is to say, okay, as a Christian, if I were to join the military or the police force, I'm establishing justice. With God's authority.
Yes, that's correct. I think
with the use of violence.
I know,
right?
Yeah,
and it's all good. As a Christian, I would have a clear conscience.
I would call it legitimate. I wouldn't call it good. I think God doesn't like it, but He gives it.
I would say it is perfectly good in the sense that God's judgments are good.
Well, I agree with that, but He's given judgments into human hands.
Yeah.
And we err in that. And so I think
granted,
in the final thing, He's going to bring the right justice. and will have had shadowy attempts at it.
Yeah. Okay. So then if I was in another frame of mind, or not a frame of mind, but in another setting, like as a leader of a church, I would never say, okay, our church, in order to grow the kingdom of heaven, not in order to defend this earthly kingdom, we're going to exert violence and inflict domination physically and emotionally on people. That would be totally wrong.
I agree with you.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Is that what you mean by the 80-20? That 80% of the time you're living in this church mode, 20% of the time you're living in this possibility of violence?
Maybe in a sense in the gospel. So I think as a Christian, your church, it's not right to be told we're going to go out with violence and we're going to subdue the people's come across and we're going to force them to be Christians. These are things that have happened in human history. I think it's right that you said that's not right. But that doesn't mean if as a Christian you come along a sidewalk and somebody's getting beat up, you shouldn't stop in with, I think your Christian responsibility is to step in with violence to stop it.
Right.
And that's why I call it the 20.
In doing that, you're not saying, I'm going to promote the kingdom, I'm going to establish the kingdom of God right now.
No.
But instead,
exactly right.
You're saying, as my role as a neighbor, as a citizen.
It came up right now.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a gospel person, but now this situation came up and it's fully put a stop to it.
Right.
But that's not the same as make it your life calling as a Christian to go put a stop to these things or to fight with
Unless you're Batman.
Yeah.
Batman came up in the small group last night because we were talking about this.
Yeah. Well, Batman is a very deep conversation, vigilantism.
Right.
And the element of justice. It's a very significant that we don't honor enough. We laugh too easily at it. We can laugh, it's fine, but it's actually a deep, difficult question.
Well, and we were talking about in the verse in Ephesians, in your anger, do not sin.
Yeah.
Right. And sin or anger isn't a sin, but a state of anger makes sin very appealing. Right.
Well, this is a question for another time because I want to probe that with you. You may be right, but my approach has thought differently.
Okay.
But I've heard different things you said and thought I need to give that ear, but I just haven't been able to work through it yet.
One of the stories that we came up on, because Batman came up, not by me, was a story of a Timbers football or soccer match I went to.
Yeah.
And I remember watching the match, and they were approaching halftime, and there were some flagrant fouls that were not getting called by the refs. And I thought, there's going to be fights pretty soon, right? Because if the refs aren't upholding justice on the field,
that's right.
Then the players take it into their own hands.
Yeah.
And that's not right. It's revenge. It's not vigilantism even.
Right.
It's just, although a little bit.
It is.
It's teammates fighting on each other's behalf, right?
Is. Yeah.
And lo and behold, second half, here we are, right? It becomes this punches thrown and red flags and or red cards and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
But that's the state of our nation right now.
Yes, that's exactly right. When you don't uphold the law, you create more chaos.
Yeah.
You promote violence.
But I think there's an argument to be made that in that chaos, we, and I think men especially, have a moral obligation, not as a means of spreading the kingdom of God or the gospel, but as a means of upholding the good and the right, making your community safe. Vigilantism is not off the table. I'm not saying right now or here.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying there is room for that.
Would you put that in the category? What's his name? The movie, the Navy SEAL guy, or whatever, and his own commander kills his wife and kids, and his own buddy.
I know what you're talking about.
The
Terminal
Amazon.
List.
Yeah, that. Yeah. Is that what you're talking about? Would that be a fair?
I think that's just revenge.
Okay.
To be honest, but there is a
only
side of that.
Only because it's not so widespread, victims everywhere.
It's so clearly personal.
That's what I meant.
It's really it's a list of people who wronged me, and I'm going to get them.
But he also thinks they wronged me in the chain of command that God ordained for justice. Right. That's why he says is it Secretary of State? I don't remember.
Yeah.
She came on the battlefield.
Yep, that's right. And there's different rules when you're on the battlefield.
And his point is, these rules now apply, and I didn't set this up. I just joined it.
Right. Yeah.
Which is
I think there's something to be said for that.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
All right. I want to transition to actually talk a little bit more about specific leadership. But before we do, I just want to make a note that this podcast is a part of the Trinity School. The Trinity School is more than a school. It's actually a culture building enterprise. So it's an effort that I'm undertaking with the help of not only Mike, but leadership in our church, right?
I subbed for you a few times, didn't I?
That we want to support education, but also gain influence in our culture, persuade people to move in the right direction, right? To support industry and how people find and develop jobs, not just the young students who are graduating now, some of them, and moving into different fields, but how do we support entrepreneurialism and stuff that's beyond the walls of a church, but within a good, I would say, Christian society, right? A communities that honor Christ. So I'm actually considered a missionary by our church, and I'm in a fundraising mode in these next few months or weeks, hopefully. So if you want to be part of that, if you want to donate to what we're doing, go check out gracedayton.com/Trinity School to find out more. Yeah. All right. So I was thinking about what it means to be a yes man, right? Who's hiring these guys who always say yes? There's a phenomenon you often see when somebody makes a great movie or a great set of movies. I think you see this in Lord of the Rings, but it happens all the time. That the next movie that director makes is not so great. So if you think Lord of the Rings was maybe the best trilogy ever made, I'm close to that camp, let's say. I would put the Hobbit trilogy as maybe the worst that could have come after it, right? And what happens and I've seen this in Hollywood, I've seen this in these interview environments that celebrities get into, and I've seen it even on YouTube. There's this buttering up flattery that happens by interviewers, or people say, wow, you're this young person, you're doing so good. And they just like ooze out this flattery that gives me the creeps, right? When I watch it. But I could see that if someone who's young and insecure and hoping to make it would just lap it up. And so what is it in a leader? What is it in a performer that would, I can see why the ego would appeal to these yes men. But what I've seen it happen in churches where strong pastoral leaders will gather around themselves these lieutenants who just say yes. And if anybody is overly creative in their own right, has a goal or ambition that's maybe outside of the direct mission of the church leader, they're going to push them away as immature, unteachable. So how in your experience have you tried to balance that out so that you are bringing in other voices, you are bringing in strong personalities that don't match? Because what I've seen a lot of is a church just becomes a collection of people with the same personality and disposition as the head pastor. And if you're not in that personality, it's considered less spiritual, right? Or immature. Go find a different church. And so you'll see all these extroverted, feeling-focused folks gather around literally charismatic Pentecostal churches, right? You'll see the bookish intellectuals focus in on this other pastor who wants to focus on systematics. And the churches divide up by personality.
Do you think that breaks down at size levels, changes? Do you see the same thing when it gets 1,000 people?
I think it keeps happening because I've gone to church. For a time in Eugene, we went to a church that was well over 1,000. And as we got to know and started volunteering, we were getting to know people in leadership because we were doing youth stuff, as we always tend to do. And they said, oh yeah, there's about 30 people that run the whole church. It's basically 10 families, 10 to 15 families, and some single people, young professionals. And they just do everything. And there's 950 people that come to watch. And their youth group was 250 kids. There's something that I don't want to denigrate like teachability. I think it's a massive, right, humility in the people that you're leading. I also have seen young people fall into the sense that I have to have strong opinions, and that's what maturity is. So I've landed on this opinion, and that means I'm ready to be a leader. That's not what that means. So I'm not trying to say you don't want teachability. I think that's incredibly important. But how do we avoid, because I don't think any leader, I think there's an internal part of us that wants yes men around us. But if you asked, they wouldn't be honestly say I didn't do it.
So I share your sympathies towards The Hobbit as being clearly less than The Lord of the Rings. Worst trilogy, I'm not sure I would say that, but definitely a drop off.
It's not the worst.
So Peter Jackson makes the first three. Would you say that the yes men were in his arena when he makes the first three? Or do you say, no, it's the result of, after that exaltation, then
that's
they gather
the
to him.
Gather in.
And that produces a mediocre result after that.
That's right.
I think that's exactly right. And what then I think would be interesting to talk about is, what is it about the non-yes men phase that produces an excellence?
Well, you got to scrap for it.
I think that's exactly
right.
What it is.
And that hunger,
I think that's exactly
to say we don't know,
what it is.
We don't know if this is going to work, man. We got to keep going.
It's an element of humility that's there.
Right.
I'm not sure if this is going to work. Oh, you have an idea? Well, let me hear it. No, I don't like that.
Yeah.
You have oh, that's not a bad point.
Right.
That would be a good, okay, but you're so desirous of making something excellent that you bring a humility to it.
So is there an age factor too, that when you're a young leader, you are more humble in that way?
In one sense.
You know, when you're Peter Jackson after Lord of the Rings, you're like, look, I made the biggest trilogy of all time.
And here's the thing: when you're young, you don't have a lot of. So there's a double-edged sword at the young. You don't have a lot of successes, but you're covering over massively with your assertion.
Yeah.
Then there becomes after that a stage when you still don't have successes, and that's probably the best time, right? But the older you get, you actually have accomplished things, and so you're not so insecure. And so probably in a sense there is an age role, is my point.
Yeah.
I think you're right, because inevitably when you're older, you've done some things well, and you have the opportunity for ego to come in and say, and pride to come in and say, I don't need anybody to tell me what to do here.
Well, and that's why I think
it's just not true.
Insecurity and ego are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, oh, I don't feel that insecurity I did as a young man. And suddenly the coin is flipped. And you think you're in confidence when in fact you've gone off.
That's right.
To the
so
other
the
side.
question, what about, can you think of any exceptions to this? Where in the humility of inexperience and hunger and pursuit, excellence is made, and then you have somebody who skips over, they feel the pride and joy of what they did, but the ego and pride did not come in and take over. They didn't surround themselves with yes men, and they still produced excellence.
Are you thinking of movies?
I don't know. Your movies was just to illustrate.
I mean, I think Steve Jobs is a decent example. He was. I
Interesting.
wouldn't list him as someone who shows me how to lead people day to day. He was intensely aggressive and in ways that were really hurtful, and I wouldn't put him on a pedestal.
Distortion field.
But he said something really interesting once, and I think he is a good example of making things happen in ways that other people just couldn't in their own capacity. He was talking about how you have to love it. And I've heard people argue about this, like, should you follow your passion? And he said, the reason you should follow your passion is because the thing that you want to do is so hard that if you don't love it, you'll quit. You'll think it's not worth it. And I can see that. And I think what he's calling passion, others would maybe call obsession, and an overwhelming certainty. But he trusted his own instincts, and in his case, they paid off.
I think he's an unusual one. I wouldn't have used him because I think I think he had yes men from the very beginning because he required it.
Right.
Now, I think he looked for creative people, but they were going to do what he wanted. Yeah. That was it. Bottom line from day one. You don't do what I want, you're not here. You're creative, you need to do what I want. Oh, you did something? So the guy who did the original Apple icons, I remember reading about this. When you hovered over them, they expanded in the early version.
Yeah.
It was a yes man, but he'd made something cool. Jobs sees it. Dude, nice job. Put it in, everybody.
Right.
He didn't ask for creativity. He didn't want feedback, but he saw something. We're doing it.
Yeah, right.
So it doesn't have to be his idea. A little weird. It didn't have to be his idea.
Well,
but if the guy would have come and pitched him, he'd have been shot down, and he probably would have lost his job. I don't need you bringing me ideas.
Right.
I do what I tell you to do.
Yeah.
Oh, you made something on your own? That's cool. Yeah, put it in, guys.
Well, part of what Jobs, I think, is in some ways unique, but it reminds me a little of our conversation about Trump. And if you stand up to him, it gives you a little more credibility.
I think that's true.
But my understanding of Jobs, and I haven't studied him deeply at all, is that he saw himself as the creator and other people as the technicians.
Yeah.
So he's surrounding himself with technicians, and he's saying, your job is to do what I say.
Yes,
because
I think that's right.
Your instincts around what looks right and what it's not. I don't trust those. Yeah.
But now if you happen to brew something, I see it. Nice job. We're using that. But I don't care about you tomorrow.
Yeah. And so that's where I think probably the best example of people doing it well would be like coaches. When you hear of these,
I think so.
Like John Wooden, right, yep. Who's talking about building the man, not just getting the win.
Winning coaches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But are those coaches fading away too? I feel I don't watch sports to any large degree, but I just see it surrounded by more and more soap opera drama, right? Where these pundits in the sports world are just gossiping about each other and accusing each other of nonsense. It's sort of like even the UFC, right? You see they almost get in a fight at the weigh-in, like, oh, give me a break. But what they're doing is they're getting everybody into a fever pitch to stir up ratings to get more views. Drama gets views, but at the same time, you're sacrificing actual manliness.
I agree.
Where you're not thrown around.
Now, the reason you use the movies as the lead point in this, but your real Purpose was in the church, talking about leadership and yes men and whatnot.
Well, and because the two areas I've been in leadership are church and schools.
Yeah.
And I've seen it in both cases.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if the reason that this happens in churches, because I do agree with you, I think it happens all the time, but I think there are different dynamics at play. First of all, pastors, people want to pedestal pastors because it makes them feel better. And people think that their pastors, they don't think their pastors have bad marriages, or we shouldn't say that. They don't think their pastors have arguments with their wives.
Yeah.
They don't think they lose their cool. They have a lot of, and they want to think that about their pastors. They need to think that in their mind about their pastors. And if the pastor tries to dispel that.
Why do they need that?
Okay, that's where I was going to go.
Yeah.
I think they need that because they deify, they make a God-like component because they struggle with connecting to God himself that they can't see.
Sure.
And they know that they would say he's perfect, he's without sin, Jesus never sinned, but I don't know what any of that means. I don't know how to talk to that. I don't know.
The little pope. I want
a little pope.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And I want to assume it of him, and that's the only way they know how to have submission is because he's of an excellence that I can't reach.
Yeah.
Rather than submission that as a human, we're on a par. God has placed him as a gifted person with spiritual gifts to lead, and I submit to him because of that reason. No, I'm more comfortable submitting to him because I believe he's more excellent than me.
I see people doing this with Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, right, on some level. But their ambition is not some spiritual thing. It's success, financial success.
Yes, that's right. Different drive.
Or some cultural impact.
That's right. That's right.
Do they deify those people? Those people aren't as accessible, though, as your local pastor. So I see what you're saying. Right?
Yeah. And it's a tough thing. And so then the yes man quality becomes something, it's a part of this warped spirituality. I'm going to agree with you and pretend it's humility and submission. Mm-hmm. And then when the pastor buys into it, because it's easy to buy into, it's super easy.
So you're saying the pastor likes that feeling of someone coming and saying, only you have the answer.
He likes it.
Being around you makes me a better person.
It's easy to like.
Yeah.
It's easy to like and you don't know you're liking it at first. Mm-hmm. And then you discover it. Number two, that's 1.1a and b. But number two is here's the reality. It's a sick reality, but it's true. Your church will run smoother if you accept it. Not necessarily healthier, but smoother.
Tell me why.
Because people don't want their pastor insisting that they understand that I have sins. Don't force me to think of you that way.
Right.
Because once we get down that path, I don't respect you as much.
Yeah.
Now what? Well, now we're in where we should be from the beginning. That's right. I'm as sinful as you are. And I'm still supposed to lead.
Yeah.
Now what are you supposed to do? You're as equal to me. In fact, you may be more virtuous than me. And you're still supposed to submit. Now we both got a problem.
Yeah. There's a lot of marriages like that.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Well, there's a lot of people get into marriage with this picture of what a spouse should be. And they have this sort of idolized view.
That's right.
And I think women might be more susceptible to it because they're...
In which one?
To idolizing the husband and then feeling more let down that he doesn't live up to it.
I think there's both. I think they both do it. Okay, I agree with you.
And what I mean is, especially women I know who raised in church. Mm-hmm. And so they do understand this dynamic of male leadership within marriage, but they've now, Christ in the church.
That's right.
And they're envisioning this man like Jesus coming in and they meet a man and he acts like Jesus when he's in public.
That's right.
And on these dates. Right. And then you get married and it's like, wait, there's this whole other
And how could he be so hurtful? How could he talk to me this way when he's this way and I looked at him and I thought he was this and what he did was so hurtful and he knew it was.
He had so much potential.
And so I think that sets her up for failure. But I also think it runs the other way too because of beauty and because of innocent, gentle natures. So women can be perceived as less sinful than men, easily perceived that way, and I think they buy into it. And I think men do too. I don't think it's true because I think we're equally broken, but the way it manifests, male sins are more aggressive and overt and out in the open. And women's sins are more manipulative and covetous and of things of their heart.
There's also a beauty
attitudes.
aspect to it. I've been looking into
Yes, there
this
is
too.
a beauty.
I was looking at how AI, they're trying to create these AI girlfriends, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things they talk about is there's an innocent beauty that they can create
That's
in
right.
these characters,
exactly right.
caricatures, that causes you to think more highly of them.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. And I think what ends up happening, because I've been in counseling situations where the man was put the woman on the pedestal
Yeah, for sure.
because of A, the beauty starts it off, but B, the moral gentleness and just fundamental niceness that this woman has.
Well, and if you're frustrated with your own ability to not lose your temper, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
And she doesn't do that.
That's exactly right.
And that becomes the centerpiece
But
of this is the sin in our family that's really
same-
breaking it, and
That's
it's
right.
all coming from you.
That's right.
When in fact, there's a whole nother layer of sin that you're not seeing.
That's exactly right. And so I remember this one situation, the woman though began to complain because she can't take the pedestal either.
Right.
I don't want to be up there. You're elevating me to what I'm not. And she begins to despise him and hate him for it.
Yep. Well, that's the yes dear conundrum.
It is. That's
right?
the yes dear. It's
Because
exactly what it is.
if you think you can yes dear your way into a happy wife, you won't find it.
Well, I also was in a counseling situation once where the man insisted that his wife called him Lord.
It's in the Bible. That's been a
And
joke between my
Abraham
wife
and
and I for a
Sarah.
long time. Yeah.
Well, he was sincere about it.
Yeah.
And so the yes dear to the man, and you just made fun of it, and I agree with that 100%.
Mm-hmm.
But the flip of it is not quite the yes, my Lord, but not using those words version of it.
Right. Yeah.
It's the same flip.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah.
The other side of what I see as, and maybe this is the more obvious one, and so we didn't even touch it, is there, you get to an age in your life where you've built something and you just want to protect it.
I know it.
And people show up with their own ideas. It jeopardizes everything.
That's true.
And so that's why older people
Yep.
are more conservative in their disposition.
You can't stop it. It's happening to me. It is happening. You can't stop it.
Well, and that's what's been such a struggle for me because I've had such a shift
No,
of
you can't
careers.
stop it, but
I've had such a shift of
Yep,
careers in the
yep.
last 3 years that I don't have anything to protect.
I know.
And it's such an unnerving
Okay,
feeling.
so that's the way I think you stop it. When I said you can't stop it, what I meant is it comes to everybody. But I have another friend who has done something about this that I think he would say you can stop it, and it's this. You have to give away all your stuff. I don't mean that in the literal sense.
Yeah.
And in a sense, with the career stuff, you're forced to,
Yep.
right? But what it is your hands get taken off all the things you did.
Right.
And now when you're forced to, you realize, wow, but it's actually healthy. You can choose to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just have to literally give away stuff and not reputational, success things. You just have to somehow push it away from you when you get older and intentionally minimize.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about that, it's a personal comment, as we're moving here, and books. I have a big library, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've accumulated over a lot of time, and it's an immense pleasure to me. I was at another man's library a year ago or so. He had a stroke. His library was my library. He was a little different, about 10,000 books, same as mine. It's a big library.
Yeah.
Rooms all over with books. A lot of nonfiction. He was a pastor. He was a psychotherapist. He had his interesting sections, you could tell.
Mm-hmm.
But now he'd had a stroke. And I, along with a couple other people, are pawing through his things.
Right.
I thought, I don't want this to be.
How
I don't
come?
want it to get to that. I want to give it away before it gets to that.
You want to have some intention behind it.
I want to have intention. It's my treasure I built. And if I protect it till my dying day, then it's going to get pawed through by other treasure seekers. Not treasure for good. I was just selling his books.
Here's the trick, though, because I'm going to represent the other side.
Okay.
My grandpa had a decent collection
Yeah.
of good Christian books, right?
Yeah.
I got most of my Watchman Nee books from him.
Yeah.
And a bunch of others.
Yeah.
And they were mostly from the 70s,
Yeah.
kind of 60s, 70s.
Yeah.
All right, at any rate, he died. No one wanted him. I went through them, and I got a bunch.
Yeah.
And I read them and treasured them.
Yeah. Yeah.
If he had, and this is my question, if he had, for the 5 years leading up to his death,
Yeah.
given them away, to me, they probably would have ended up with people that didn't actually want them.
Possibly. What if he'd approached
because
you
it's like,
about
oh,
it?
he's giving
What if he'd
more
just
books.
talked to you
It would have
first,
been
though?
it would have been a beautiful thing, right? If he had known that I
Could
wanted
you have
to.
ended up with the same Watchman? Yeah, but shouldn't he have approached you first? In other words, he has spheres of getting rid of these treasures. So he starts with the sphere closest to home
Right.
and grandkid, right?
There's something beautiful about the gift, but part of what I would worry is, you give out a lot of books. Mm-hmm. How many of them get read?
I know.
Right. But whereas if you had one of your, kids or grandkids even come through and say, man, you didn't know they were hungry for this and they found it like a treasure.
Yeah.
So it's not all bad.
Yeah. The Greek guys that I do Greek with, I don't know if we'll see if they ever hear this because some of them listen. And every year I give books. I probably give a few times in a year, but I do at Christmas with an intentionality every year.
Yeah.
And then I do periodically. The truth is, even these guys who read a lot, they don't read many of the ones I give them.
It's a lot.
I've actually had them given back to me on accident.
Oh, that's awesome.
It is funny. But then there comes another time. Recently, I just had two, gave one to one, and he read it, and it was very, he really liked it. And another one, same, he was working through it, and it's like, okay. So it's just, I don't know if it falls 80-20, but it falls some kind of split where there's only success part of the time.
All right, well, we've got about 10 minutes left. I want to talk about a correction, a little bit of a revisit of culture, and we'll see if we can get to your cancel culture idea, too, from one of the comments we had a while back. So 2 episodes ago, we were talking about abortion, and in my statements on it, I was listening to our episode there, I made the statement that I don't blame women for abortion, and I misspoke. I actually do blame women for abortion. I just don't only blame women for abortion. And that's what I was meaning to say.
I think that's what you meant. I remember.
I just heard the sentence and I thought, there's a strain of pro-life that say women are never at fault. And I think it connects to what you were saying of this idea of that men are the gruff and the uncivilized.
Yeah.
And that's not untrue in some ways. I think women do civilize us in godly ways, right?
I don't even want to tell all the stories there. I will tell one though.
Okay.
Before Melissa and I were married, we're dating in college, and she, so at the end of the year, you wrap everything up, and you have limited stuff in your room because sometimes you got to drive back, and you have a car.
Yeah.
I had to fly, so you have only so much stuff you can have. Well, here's the funny thing: I didn't help her pack up her room. Mm-hmm. I didn't care. She came to help me pack up mine, right? Stuff.
Yeah.
Then she saw the sheets. She goes, "When did you last wash these?"
Oh yeah.
I said, I don't know. I don't know if I
Last
watched
time
them
they were
all
dirty.
year.
Yeah.
And she couldn't believe it. And she made me throw them away.
There you go.
And it's like, and it was only later
I'll tell you one. I found
a
a solution to that in the years before I got married.
Yeah.
You make your bed, and I got this from my roommate, Jonathan, if you're listening. You make your bed, and then you set a sleeping bag on top of it. And then you sleep in the sleeping bag. And no one ever checks if it's clean or dirty. It just is. And you're not really in it. It's on you.
Yeah.
So you're actually sleeping on the comforter.
Yeah.
And it's all. And then when you get up, your bed is made because the comforter's all tucked in, the pillow's in place. It's just a sleeping bag sitting on top.
Well, that whole dynamic that makes girls, here we're talking about girls because all of a sudden you and I are reverting being 20. Gross. The truth is they're right.
Yeah, that's right.
We just don't think of it that way.
No, that's true.
And so the civilization that comes to us is a great blessing from God. But so is the wildness we bring to them.
Yeah, that's right. All right, I've got a couple things to visit. One of them, a couple episodes ago, I was mentioning how I noticed that culture had frozen in the last 25 years with respect to clothing. Watching old Friends and Seinfeld episodes, and basically, minus a pirate shirt here and there, right? People were dressing in the late 90s the same way we dress now. And that basically, I was listening to one of my wife's friends talk about how now the low-rise jeans are on their way back in. And they were bemoaning this, right? Because they just got over having their underwear showing all the time, right? Okay. But it totally reinforced to me that the style's not actually changing. It just sort of gets a little baggier and then a little tighter and then a little baggier and a little tighter every few years, right? But that's not a real change. Everybody looks roughly the same. And if you buy the 501s, they're always going to be in style. And I started to expand it and said, okay, well, where else? Well, the movies are all in redos. Even if it's not all sequels, well, we're going to get a new Spider-Man, right? Who's going to be the next Wolverine? Who's going to be the next James Bond? It's all recycling, okay? And then music. Music hasn't really changed. You could really say, well, the music from the 50s to the 60s was hugely different. 70s, again. 80s, again. 90s, again. And now You could listen to something new. Like I was listening to this album I was going to recommend, Vampire Weekend, Father of the Bride. It's a few years old, but it's pretty good. And I was enjoying it, and I just thought this could have come out any time in the last 30 years. I wouldn't know unless I looked on the CD case, right?
You can't date it.
Yeah. So part of what I'm wondering is that a conservative reaction? So I call that conservative. I don't want anything new. If someone tries to change things, I'm going to say that guy's a weirdo and push him to a distance, right? Change the music, change the movies. You try a new thing. It doesn't sell very well. That's conservatism. I want my Wolverine. I want my James Bond. It's a comfort. It's a safety. And because there's so much chaos in our culture, the things that we can control, which is the things we buy, right? I'm not going to buy Bud Light because they're pushing against me. So the things we buy, we make sure to buy the things we've always bought. Because we need this balance, humans do, between the progress and the innovation and the comfort and security of the past.
And so we're being forced in chaos. Change is being forced in the areas it shouldn't be.
That's right.
Then the result, unintended result, is we can't take too much change in whereas it should be changing in.
Yeah. So the creative expressions of the day-to-day, the individualism of people walking down the street is muted. Under the weight of this institutional
That's a very interesting. I would never have probably thought of that in 100 years. I don't think of clothes in the same way that you do. I enjoy music, but I probably don't think of it in the same way. I never would have come to that.
Well, part of why I noticed it is because you like your oldies, right? You like that music of the past, and I thought, I don't. Like, I don't go back and listen to Nirvana.
Yeah.
It's just not, and that's when I was in high school, right? That should have
been
a
thing.
I
like the oldies all the way back to the 50s.
Yeah.
When I wasn't even alive. I enjoy discovering things that, now that's not my favorite sound, but that's actually catchy. I can really...
But here's what I noticed.
I like to listen to it.
The music that I think, what do I go back and listen to? It's all from around 2010, which is in my late 20s, early 30s. And so it's like, what was happening then that sort of became the
late
moment?
20s, early 30s, you said? Oh, well, I do have mine for that. It would be 80s music when I was a teenager. I mean, if I would only have one set,
so most times I've heard people say
their teen years.
They really love this music. It's when around they're 18 years old.
I know.
18,
that's
19.
exactly right.
Yeah. But it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
But part of it is I think in my ministry with kids, I'm always hanging out with younger than I am.
Yeah.
Not socially, but just in my life, in ministry. So there's an influence there.
That's interesting. I think that's a great point, Luke.
Here's another topic.
On second thought.
Well, thank you.
Here's
another one, and we'll finish with this because I got to run. I was thinking we were talking with my students about the bell curve, like we did a few episodes back, and about how you create a group over on the right. And I was showing with them that in a bell curve, if you have two distinct peaks or multiple peaks, what that means is you have external influences, right? So if you take the normal distribution of height, let's say, and suddenly there's a big group that's much taller, probably you had an immigration, right? You had people come from some region of the world where they're taller.
Yeah.
I learned recently that the shortest people group and the tallest people group are both in Africa, which I thought was really cool. Anyway, in the same way, we were talking about that we're going to introduce Christian ideas as this influence in culture, and that's going to create a peak over on the right, and then people in their desire to fit in are going to shift. You're going to have influence across to the neutral middle or the passively in favor of what it is you're talking about. And so then I started to talk to these kids. We were talking about the Civil War, we were talking about government, how does it work? And then we said, what can we do? And I was showing them this, how you can have influence. But I said, okay, what actual things, teenagers, you can't influence Biden to do anything, or the governor of any country. You can't.
Yeah.
You can pretend you can, but you're being manipulated into believing that.
Yeah.
So they said, well, we can just bring it up. We can talk to people about it. And I said, that's something you could do, right? And they were immediately motivated to talk about like abortion, right? Things that are clearly a Christian stand that apply to a political realm. We can bring it up, and we talked about how do you bring it up, in what setting are you gentle, and what setting might you be aggressive? Jesus was aggressive here, he wasn't aggressive there. The woman at the well versus Nicodemus and all these things. Okay. But then it struck me that the biggest strategy I see exerted on us by the powers that be in the left is divide and conquer, right? We're going to divide you up in, like, I see the Republicans splitting into the Trump and the not Trump for a while, but even among the Trump, it's this Christian and not Christian. So yeah, you're for Trump, but you're also okay with gay marriage and Bruce Jenner and these other things. And then we're the Christians, and we're pushing them away, and we're pushing and now you're isolated, you could be defeated.
It's a spirit of division.
So the question is, as a Christian, who wants to be politically, maybe not politically, but socially influential, I would say, even if not politically isn't your thing, is divide and conquer a strategy that we should be implementing against our enemies. Where we say, well, what's the wedge topic that would separate I'm just a normal liberal who wants everyone to be loved from the let's destroy society, let's burn it down and rebuild it in our image.
Yeah.
Or do we just leave that to God? And I'm not trying to say that in a degraded way.
Yeah.
To me, there's definitely a biblical standard to leave it to God. I don't know if that's the thing, though.
Yeah.
My impulse is to say we should get more strategic. We're sort of still passive. Like our active in favor is complaining more, making a podcast, right? Whereas maybe on the left, with a lot more funding, because their rich people are more motivated than ours, they're actually hiring people to go into communities and have these impactful both support and division.
But that's understandable because you made an observation last time, which I didn't really hear it. I heard you say it, but I didn't know why you were saying it. And it was only upon reflection that I did. And that is, you said, did you notice we were conflating Christian and right and conservatism in our conversation?
Right.
And we did. I think there was a reason. I think you were right to note it. And then I think there would be a correctness to having a critique of it.
Yeah.
And there would be an understandableness of having them overlap.
It's a Venn
easily.
diagram. They do overlap.
Yes, that's right. And I think the reason for that is because Christianity is a belief system that says, I've aligned with what God is wanting to do in the world. Conservatism is much more aligned with a creator and these laws that the creator made. And you need to live within them. It's leftism that is trying to destroy the laws of the creator, and making a narrative to get back to the God stuff, but we're going to do it our own way. Because they want Eden.
Well, it's a compassion narrative.
It is a compassion. And so it reflects certain things that God says are important. It just bysteps. And then there's another segment that says, I don't want the God stuff at all.
So are you saying they're using a compassion narrative, right? Or they say empathy and equity, but a compassion narrative that is reflected in the personality of God himself.
That's right.
But a methodology that rejects his standards.
Yes.
Right?
That's
which is where they reject his law.
I think the distinction between communism and Acts 2, they had all things in common. Right. That is not communism. Acts 2 is you and I choose to give our stuff away. Communism says, no, you shall give it away.
That's not your stuff to give.
That's right.
Yeah.
And those are quite different, even though they have a semblance of looking similar.
Well, that is the difference, too, between government and church, is the government takes taxes whether you want them to or not.
Yes,
they'll take taxes or they'll take you away.
That's a good point.
And the church doesn't get to do that.
No.
It never should.
They said you voluntarily.
That's right.
Unless you're part of one of those churches that you sign a covenant that you have to tithe. Anyway, what was your question again?
Well, the question is, should divide and conquer be a method that we... my instinct is to say it's okay. But I don't have 100%.
My instinct goes the other way.
Okay.
I figured this would be a place where we differed. That's why I wanted to lead with, would you have a preference?
Yeah.
I can understand why, but I do think it's a leave it to God. And here's why. Here's why I said what I said before about the left and right and overlap.
Okay, and then I'm going to give you a biblical example.
Okay. Well, the left has to spend more money because they're doing contrary to the way God made the world to function.
Okay.
So they have to work harder to destroy and tear down. Now,
well, the reality is the right actually gives way more money. It's just our charities go to churches. And
in the big picture, the right is far more generous. They give more money, all that kind of stuff. That's right.
But if our churches aren't having a social impact, then we're not getting that outcome.
But the left has to work at it. I also think that's why they strategize. So the devil is called the deceiver.
Yeah.
Does that mean we should use his tactics and deceive the enemy? Right? And I say no. I'll give an illustration, and then you can give your illustration.
Did God conceal from the enemies what the purpose of the cross would be?
Yes, he did. He did. That's right.
Did he deceive them?
In some sense.
Do you know what I'm saying? Maybe.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, okay.
I'm totally good with that, which is why I don't think it's an easy one. But I tend to lean. I would not. Deceiving is different than strategizing. If you're inclined to strategize and say the right needs to strategize or Christians need to strategize more, I wouldn't disagree with that, because be wise as a serpent and harmful as a dove. Harmless as a dove. Harmful as a dove.
Harmless as a dove. Yeah, innocent.
And innocent as a dove. I think there's something there. But I also think God takes care of confounding his enemies. That's more his role than my role.
Is there something explicit that you think of in Scripture to designate that as God's? Because even the things that God keeps for himself, like establishing, his judgment, he does delegate that to governments.
Well, I was going to think vengeance is mine, says the Lord, but that probably doesn't quite pay. What about the stories of Israel's history? I mean,
there's definitely examples where he does, right? He does
Babylon,
divide.
they hear about the usurpation, and so they flee. They're encamped around Jerusalem and they go away.
Right.
And another one, there's a fly.
An angel of the Lord comes and confuses them.
That's right. All these things.
But Gideon also, he's deceiving them in battle.
That's right.
And causing confusion where they turn on each other.
Yep.
The example I thought of,
at the direction of the Lord, that the strategy wasn't one he came up with.
But to me, that's even cooler. That God's teaching him how to play games with their head. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like tactics-wise.
Well, and I would say David's, when he says, the Lord has taught my fingers to war.
That's right. Yeah.
I think that's a legitimate.
The example I thought of in the lesson we were having here at school was Paul standing before the Sanhedrin when he says, it's for the resurrection of the dead that I come before you.
And he did it knowing he'd split them.
He was dividing them up, the Pharisees from the Sadducees.
This is a good illustration. Totally agree.
So if that's true,
I think there's a role.
How can we, as Christians, divide up the enemies of God?
Okay, wait.
As a way to undermine their influence.
Can I push back on your thing here?
Yeah.
So first, great point. It's right. What about this? What if it's modified? Paul's in a pinch.
And what I told the kids is, you don't get to do this to your parents.
Okay.
Because they immediately laughed, because they knew, I know how to pit mom against dad when I want to get my way.
Right. And so what I was going to go to...
There's a darkness to what you're doing.
Yes. So what I was wanting to go to and see what you thought about it, it's not Paul's normal strategy. It's not off limits.
You wouldn't exert it on your friends.
You don't exert it on your friends, and it's not even the first thing he tried when he was before government people.
Yeah.
He didn't go to those things. Even the whole thing about appealing to his Roman citizenship at one point with Agrippa, that wasn't where he started. It's where he ended because he couldn't get where he wanted to go by other methods.
Right. And his goal in the end was always to be able to declare directly, this is the gospel.
And to win them and persuade them to become Christians.
Yeah.
And so playing the card of the divide card, we'll call it, which in both those cases are legitimate, and Paul did it, and you're right to point it out, but it's almost like I don't think I'm going to win these people at this moment, and I'm going to get hindered and cut out here, so I'm going to do something to extricate myself.
Yeah. I think of it as the phrase son of the devil. When you're at the point where you can look at those who are opposing you and say, no, they're just children of the devil, then the strategy options open up a little bit. You still are held to account by God.
I'll tell you the one I think you said that you liked it quite a bit, and I admired it less than you, but I did admire it. And it would fit in this thing. The story you told about the church who goes and gets all the seats at the drag show thing.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Right? Mm-hmm. And in a sense, that's harmless as a dove.
That's right.
And wise as a serpent. The reason what I didn't have as much admiration for you, because what I heard at the time, and you may not have been saying it, was that's what we should be doing all the time. And then I would back off from that.
I'm not saying Sunday church should go down, but if it was happening on Sunday during church, I wouldn't be against it either.
Yeah.
But we don't say, okay, you know what? We're going to do this every Sunday. Let's go to the neighboring towns.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Right. Because your obligation as a church is to worship God and to glorify him in the community.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, you've been listening to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke. If you enjoyed this episode or found something to reconsider, share it with a friend. Start a good conversation and then let us know about it. We want to hear. And remember, dig a little deeper and think again. We'll see you next time.